Yeah, this talk is about optimistic message dissemination, and it's a joint work with Gender, who's also here at the conference, and CERN. And so the setting we are in is that we have n parties, which is, you can think of in a decentralized setting, so these are thousands or tens of thousands of parties, and you want to allow any party to send a message such that everybody else receives this message, right? That's this multicast, the functionality at the bottom, basically. And this is what is used in most blockchain protocols. Like think of Bitcoin, you're mining a new block, you're now the sender in this setting, you want that everybody learns about this new block, right? And of course, we want this to be like happen as fast as possible. And we assume here, kind of for simplicity of the model, that in principle, like everybody is connected, right? So you can send a message to everybody else in principle. It's not necessarily true in practice, but it's kind of a simplifying assumption here. Okay, so now basically trivial solution now is of course that, yeah, you just send the message to everybody, right? That's it, right? Yeah, so I mean, this is good, right? It's very secure, right? Basically, doesn't matter who's honest, who isn't, right? If the sender is honest, he sends it to everybody. That's it, right? Latency is also low. Problem is that, I mean, for the sender, this is very costly, right? If n is large, right? So if you look at the communication complexity, like the total communication complexity is just n times l, right? Where n is the length of the message, which is optimal, right? Everybody receives the message only once, but the per-party communication is very high, right? The sender also needs to send n times l bits, which will take a lot of time if n is very large. Right, so the goal of this kind of types of protocols is to minimize this per-party communication. Right? So you want to make this tractable in a setting with a very large number of nodes. And the basic protocol that is used in many blockchain protocols is kind of using some flooding idea. Right? The sender here doesn't send a message to everybody, but samples a uniform subset and sends it only to those people. And then if you receive a message for the first time, you basically again sample uniform subset and send it again to those people. And this continues until there's nobody receiving the message for the first time, at which point everybody has received it. So that's a very simple protocol that's very robust. And essentially what this gives you is from this graph that is you see here, that in principle everybody is connected. We are now activating some edges, basically randomly. Right? So the sender who's now sending a message to some of the nodes essentially activates these edges randomly. Right? So these orange edges are now the ones where messages are sent, and the other ones are not active. So essentially you're getting a random graph, and there are like studies dating back a very long time ago with Erdos and Reni, who looked at these random graphs, and there are basically results that say that this is like very robust, right? So for sufficiently large n, basically this is always connected, and the diameter is just logarithmic in n, and you only need to send basically the message to log n neighbors. Right? So this is very efficient and great. What's not so great and what's not considered here are corruptions, right? So we can have, of course, people who don't follow the protocol, right? And if you think about what you can do in our setting, is essentially the most terrible attacker is just this guy here who's chilling out and doing nothing, right? Because all we want is that you're sending the message to everybody, right? So the worst you can do is to not send it. I mean, if you send it to more people or to like different people or whatever, this will just help the protocol. And I mean, sending different messages is also kind of out of scope here. So we do not consider authenticity because this can solve with signatures or whatever on top, right? So basically, we just have to care about people not sending anything. And then what happens essentially is if you have this random graph and you have two corrupted nodes who do nothing, you can essentially just think about removing these nodes, right? And you want that the graph that is remaining is still connected and has low diameter, right? And in that case, basically your protocol still works, okay? And now if you look at the per-party communication complexity of these types of protocols, you now see that essentially, so everybody has to send the message to still kind of log n neighbors. There's also this kappa, which is a security parameter that you have to add if n is small. You can also ignore that for sufficiently large n. And then what's now coming in here in addition is this gamma inverse factor, where gamma is the kind of the assumed worst case fraction of honest parties. Right? So if you assume, for example, in Bitcoin that up to 50% of the nodes could be corrupted, then this gamma would be 1/2, right? Or in like Byzantine protocols, you would assume like 2/3 are honest. So you would need to multiply now this complexity by either 2 or like 1.5, right? Depending on how much honesty you assume. Yeah, and I mean, there has also been last year at Eurocrypt, the paper basically showing how you can use error correcting codes to reduce this communication complexity. So you can basically get rid of this kappa plus log n factor and have a per party communication of only L times this gamma inverse. And in the same paper, it was also shown that this is asymptotically optimal, right? And for this L, it's clear, but you have to send the whole message, obviously. But also this gamma inverse, this is inherent, right? You cannot get rid of it, right? So that basically means the more corruption you want to tolerate, essentially the less efficiency you have, because the more parties you need to send a message to, which intuitively also makes sense, right? Okay, so now the goal here is basically to still now reconsider this and think whether this is really necessary. Okay, so I mean, there was a proof there, so maybe it's true. But if we look a bit more, we can think about what this honesty fraction means, right? I mean, usually this is a worst case bound, you assume. For Bitcoin, there can be up to 49% corruption, but that's just in the worst case where you still want to be secure. But most of the time, you can assume you're not under full attack, right? So most of the time, you will have a higher honesty fraction than what you assume in the worst case, right? So now what we essentially try to do here is to be more efficient in the case where you have more honesty than what you assume in the worst case. Right, so that is kind of this optimistic protocol where you say the optimistic case is the one where you have like a high honesty fraction. And now instead of just one gamma, you can now look at 2 bounds, basically. You have this worst case gamma, which would still be this 1/2 in the Bitcoin case, for example. And then you can also look at this best case setting, which is, you can look at a different bound. For example, there you assume 95% of the parties are honest. And then you want that your protocol performs more efficiently if you actually have at least 95% honesty, right? Which you can hope that this is most of the time true. Okay, so now how can we do this? The basic idea is pretty simple. Let's we essentially start by just the sender sending the message using some protocol using this best case bound. Right, so you can just take one of the protocols that exist and instantiate it with the gamma, for example, that assumes 95% honesty, and then you just send the message using this, and you hope that it works, okay? And then we need some way to check whether this actually worked or not. Okay, this will look at how to do this, but just assume there's a magical way, so you would find out whether this was successful or not. And if it's not successful, then you just fall back to worst case protocol. You now let the sender again send a message basically using a protocol that works in the worst case. And so if it did succeed, you may think, okay, it's done. It's not exactly true, it's almost done, but so it could be that there's still some small set of nodes who did not receive the message. And so for those, we still want to guarantee that everybody gets it. We allow them essentially to pull the message from the others who did receive it. Right, so in that case, we let the sender, again, use this worst case protocol, but now only send the hash of the message, which is much more efficient because the hash is very short. And then if you receive this hash, but you don't know the message, you would ask some of your neighbors for the message, okay? So that's the very high level idea of this protocol. And one cool feature of this is also that this protocol you use in the first step, for this you don't need any formal security guarantees. So this can be some heuristic protocol where you send this to people who are geographically close or who have a small ping or whatever. And basically this overall will still be provably secure because we have these fallback mechanisms, right? So if this initial protocol did not work, we still make sure that it works in the end because of these fallbacks. And so if you look at the efficiency, basically if you are in the best case, then this first step already works. So then it's basically as efficient as the best case protocol. And in the worst case, you essentially lose some factor here because you're sending it twice, first with the best case and then with the worst case. But it's still kind of not too far off. Now, what's remaining to look at is how we do the two things in these orange boxes. How do we check for the success, and how does this pooling work exactly? Okay, so checking for success, I mean, trivial solution would be the sender just asks everybody, did you get the message? And then they reply. That's not very efficient, but we can do something similar by just sampling a uniform subset of the nodes, some committee that you ask, basically send them the hash of the message, and then they can basically tell you whether they got it or not. And then you just essentially statistically extrapolate from this, and then this gives you some bound on which fraction of the total population did receive it. And then basically, if this is above some threshold, you know that it was successful. Okay. So that's pretty straightforward. Now, how do we let parties pull the message? So now this red person here is now not the initial sender, but this is a node who did not receive the message, but received the hash. So he knows basically I need this message. Now here, essentially, you again sample some subset of the nodes uniformly whom you ask for the message. Okay, and the kind of simple solution would just do that and basically let them send you back the message. And that would work, but we do like two kind of optimizations of this. The first one is that this random sampling here, we use some VRF that basically allows you to prove that this was sampled correctly. Right? So you use the correct distribution to sample this, and this essentially prevents some kind of denial of service setting where some malicious person just pulls from everybody all the time, and then you have to send a lot of messages. And the second thing is that instead of basically letting everybody send you the full message, we use a similar trick that was used in the paper from Eurocrypt last year I mentioned with this error correcting codes. So you essentially ask, for example, the first guy here, you say, okay, this is the hash of the message, and send me kind of the first share of some error correcting code if you have it. And from the second guy, you want the second share, and from the third guy, the third share. So you use some. In this case, right, the message would be split into 3 different shares, such that if you have sufficiently many of those, in this example, 2 would be sufficient, you can reconstruct the full message. So that's just to get a bit more efficiency so people don't have to send the full message. Yeah, and that's basically it, right? So in conclusion, our protocol combines 2 protocols, like one for the best case and one for the worst case, where this best case protocol, basically you don't require any security guarantees, can be any protocol that you want. And you achieve also this asymptotically optimal per-party communication complexity overall. And in the worst case, you are as secure as the worst case protocol. And in the best case, you are like almost as efficient as the best case protocol. Thank you.
Thank you for the talk. Funnily enough, related to the thing I was mentioning previously, but have you looked at these rateless codes? So this might help the work. Right now we have kind of like you distinguish the best case, you try some stuff in the best case, and then you perform some test. Rateless codes kind of allow you to consistently sample from other people without requiring like a fixed number of shares. So it's this idea that essentially like you can take the shares themselves can be generated on the fly by honest parties. Obviously, the dishonest parties are just going to be laying back in their hammock. But I think this probably allows you to decay from the best case, which is not known, but could potentially be some heuristic that you sample only in the best case. And if you haven't reconstructed, you could further sample from more people as necessary on the fly. So you don't need to sample from one party, but you could sample from any party which has done the reconstruction. And since you're assuming everyone's already fully connected, that's fine, I think, right?
Yeah, I mean, you don't want to ask everybody all the time, of course, for efficiency reasons. But
Yeah, or just or it's like a small sample
Yes.
of people or something of the
Right,
like.
right.
Okay. Anyways, might be interesting to look at because here I think the best case to case very nicely to the worst case without needing to do this kind of like secondary sampling step, and maybe gets you probably asymptotically tight to both.
Okay, yeah.
Anyways.
Thank you. Yeah, didn't look into this, but very interesting. Thanks.
So I got confused. So I assume that you're avoiding a kappa security parameter, but you're using hashes, right? So that will introduce a kappa parameter in your analysis because you're sending a hash of values, and right?
Right. Yes. So I mean, essentially, I mean, the whole protocol only makes sense if the message is sufficiently long, obviously, right? So if you're just sending a hash in total, right, then you just send a hash and that's it, right? But I mean, so here essentially I mean, it's true that on top, right, you would send basically kappa bits using this protocol. But you don't just send it in plain, right? But you use again some protocol, right? So if for this worst case protocol, you also use essentially this Eurocrypt thing. This will basically, deal with this, right? I mean, this L then would be the kappa, but this would be subsumed then in the length of the message, right? Which is much longer than the kappa, right? So.
Any other question? Okay, so let's thank the speaker again.